So today is a very exciting day. I am so honored and thrilled to be here with Dr. Ekta Vyas, who is the Chief Human Resource Officer of Keck Medicine of USC. And one thing, Dr. Vyas, that I did not tell you when we were on this planning call is that my aunt was cured of breast cancer at your hospital 20 years ago. She's now 94 years old and doing amazing. So thank you for your work in just having an amazing staff and just having a world-class organization. So I just wanted to share that with you. We are going to be talking today about a topic that's near and dear to my heart and that I truly feel can change the course of your career, whether you are a rising female leader or you are an established executive. We're going to be talking about the journey from influence of power to the power of influence.
Introvert.
And for those of you who have been following me for a while, you know I love, love, love this topic. So before we get into this important topic, Dr. Vyas, I just wanted to share with the audience and also congratulate you again on a couple of things that you've really been honored for your amazing work. That's the 2025 Women of Influence honoree by Success Magazine. You've been named as 10 of the most influential HR executives to follow in 2024. And one more, I'm sure the list goes on and on, but I wanted to mention that also the designation of the world's most amazing woman leader, experienced and influential female leader to follow in 2025. So we don't have enough time to keep going on the awards and accolades, but congratulations on those. And I'm really excited to welcome you today.
Sheryl, thank you so much. I am humbled and I'm honored to be here with you, spending some time talking about my journey. And honestly, congratulations to you on the Fearless Female Leader book. I just can't wait to finish reading the book and truly, truly appreciate you starting the podcast with the recognition of the organization that I work at and the outcomes for you in your personal life. So we're really, really thrilled to be here today.
Well, thanks so much. Well done, well deserved. And I'm really looking forward to you sharing some nuggets of wisdom. But also, we're going to get in and learn, being the Chief Human Resource Officer of one of the premier medical institutions in the country. I have to ask, was there a person or a situation or what inspired you to not just dream big, but do big things?
Wow. So big is a big word, right? And it's interpreted differently by all of us. So I really don't know if I've already made big. I just feel I have miles to go before I sleep. But for where I what my journey has been to get to where I am, certainly, there has been a combination of internally, right? How motivated I am as an aspirational person, as an ambitious person. I think there's certain parts of you that are part of your nature, right? And then there comes the nurture. I feel fortunate to have really a wonderful blend of nature and nurture, right? That pushed me internally and also gave me the support externally. My father was a mining engineer, had a wonderful career. I was born and raised in India, studied at a convent. So very well sponsored from an education perspective. My parents had huge aspirations for me as much as I did, right? So that I didn't have a struggle trying to move forward like with resistance, in my family. And then certainly a huge shift for me in my life when I moved to US with my husband. I had to compromise the career path I was on and had to start rebuilding myself in a completely new country. But even there, right, the support mechanism existed. My husband had higher aspirations for me than I had for myself. So, from that perspective, if where I am is considered big, it certainly is the support system plus the inner motivation What I certainly, if I were to just talk about my inner motivation, what I can share with you that since I was a little child, right, since I was very little, I had an inner desire to push beyond boundaries. Literally, I don't know where it came from, and I had a very silent courage. It's very interesting. I'm an introvert. I was a hardcore introvert I still am an introvert, but I've learned, right, in executive positions to really open up and talk and communicate because the position demands that. But as an introvert, I think there was so much inner thought. There was a lot of reflection, contemplation, absorption, deep feeling, and deep thinking, right? And I believe all of that along with some kind of a hidden silent confidence that I didn't realize as I was growing up that there was a part of me that was fearless, right? When you're little, you really don't realize that you are a little different than others. You will do things that others won't do, but your courage at that time is also uncalculated.
Mhm.
And as you grow up, right, and as you start seeing how the situation evolves, when you're courageous in a particular situation, when you speak up in a particular situation, you also learn situational awareness, right? And you start to kind of, temper your courage or, whatever you might want to call it, right? Contain your courage and be very calculative in your moves. So it's been an interesting journey. I will say I'll wrap up my answer, Sheryl, here. I think if I go back to what you asked me, what inspired me to be big, I don't think I ever reflected whether I want to be big, but what I certainly always wanted was to make a difference, have an impact, and inspire others, and at least do something that would make a difference in other people's lives. So here we are talking about that.
Yeah, I love that. And if you're listening, you might be thinking, well, I want to do that too, but I'm not a chief human resource officer or I'm not in a CXO position. And I really love that you said that because that can be true regardless of where we are. I have a daughter who's, 25, a recent, graduate. And so, applying that to where you are today and making that difference, I think will help you to be courageous. And I also love how you talked about being fearless. And one thing I talk about, of course, in the book is it doesn't mean without fear.
Yeah.
It means just moving forward, anyways.
Despite, yep,
Yeah,
yeah.
despite fear. So I love that so much. And so for people, if they're just getting to know you, or they might just assume that you were born into the world as a chief human resource officer of a premier medical institution with no challenges along the way. But many times that, and most times, or every time, that is just not the case. So, can you share one or two challenges that you ran into? And of course, being a mental toughness and high performance coach, I have to ask, what has been the mindset that's allowed you to move past and keep going?
Sure. Many, many, many challenges. I've even stopped counting now, right? And sometimes, when we hear about folks who've really, really worked very hard and move forward, right? A lot of that has to do with the lack of support or the lack of, a sponsorship for education. And as I've said, I've really not had any of that. I feel really privileged from that perspective. My challenges that I had to overcome were really more about being an independent thinker
Mhm.
and being courageous and very silently confident with not settling down with no as an answer in multiple situations. And part of what I said in my first answer to your question, that there's a deep thinker and a deep I feel very deeply, I think very deeply, that introvert side of me, that I always had thoughts and opinions that were considered as beyond my age, right? So that kind of creates a huge issue for those who've gone through similar journeys, right? When you are an independent thinker, you speak up your mind, you have the courage, right? And you speak with confidence. I'm a feminist, and I say that with really a lot of pride, which has also created a lot of challenges in my life because I've always stood up for, not being treated in an unfair manner because I'm a woman, right? And it can take a different shape and form based on who the audience is, what the situation
Mhm.
is. So my challenges really have been mitigating or kind of overcoming a lot of perceptions that come out of those women, right, who come across as courageous and who will question and who will speak up, right, in situations where things are not right. So challenging the status quo has been a huge part of my career, my journey. And honestly, both in my personal life and in my professional life, that's very, very true about me. Those who know me very clearly, one of the biggest challenges for me, I've shared this in one of the other podcasts that I interviewed for, was coming to a new country and a continent. I was born and raised in India, and I had to pivot and start a completely new career in a new educational system. And going for a master's program literally had to deal with that difference in the way India treats an undergrad program versus United States treats an undergrad program. And again, not settling down for no as an answer when I was asked to go through a second bachelor's before I could go for a master's. And there's a very long story, which I'm going to stay away from given the time considerations we have. But again, going back to, I'm not going to take no as an answer, and kept pushing and pushing until the dean took a special action. Dean of College of Social Sciences took a special action for me and created a pathway for me to take some courses through Open University, get some letters of recommendation here in this country, and apply for a master's program to get into a master's program. And I did avoid going through a second bachelor's throughout, that whole arduous journey. You've reviewed my profile, and I've kind of developed a profile of transformational leader, right? And I think that you asked for two examples, and I shared an example from my educational experiences from a professional journey. Being that transformational leader hasn't come easy, right? It's really, really, these are skills, or call it, the traits that are inherent in you as a confident woman, as an independent thinker, as somebody who stands up and is righteous and speaks up. They can really, really be very difficult in a professional environment, right? And the matter of the fact is, I've tried to be a voice for people in leadership role, for people who don't have voice, right? And take that mission forward. And when you're young and you get into leadership roles pretty early, like I did, right? And you are sitting next to your peers who have spent a full career getting to where they are, and you try to speak up, right? You really don't get a lot of favorable behavior. And if I were
I
to
think
choose
you're
my
being
words right.
politically, yeah, I was going to say, I think you're being politically correct when you're saying that. I'm sure there's stronger words for that, but we get the picture.
Right. So, I'll just wrap it up with the follow-up you asked, what mindset helped me keep going. I think if I were to be very succinct, I would say, clarity of my direction and clarity of my resolve, right? I think, the quiet confidence in me is really, and that whole aspiration about making a difference, making an impact, is standing up for what is right, right? When you know that you're in the right path, right, and you're doing the right thing, and you're not harming anybody, and your objectives are for the greater good, right, as a transformation leader or a change agent, and you have that resolve and clarity of direction, that gives me the grit and the resilience that has helped me overcome a lot of challenges in my career.
Yeah, so that is just so great. And I also, for everybody listening, a lot of times I really want to spotlight something that Dr. Vyas said. And when somebody tells you something, it's not necessarily the truth. Meaning that, oh, you have to spend 4 years getting another bachelor's degree. I mean, if it is something that you're passionate about, it is for the greater good, and just stick, gain clarity on why that was probably obviously a very necessary, your master's was a very necessary stepping stone to getting to your doctorate. And so you really went after it and you really changed your truth. And to be honest, I love that story so much because that's how I got into my master's program at USC. My background was in English. I wanted to get into that applied sports psychology program. I did not want to get another bachelor's degree. And so maybe it was similar, maybe not, but just went out and got the courses that I needed and got in. So I think it, not to sound corny, but where there's a will, there's a way. And I think that clarity of vision is super important and empowering. And so speaking of power, though, is there a source of power that you draw upon? Because many times whether we're a rising leader or we are an established leader that's either in part of the executive leadership team and board members, and we've really reached the pinnacle, sometimes and oftentimes it gets hard. And so, what is your source of power when things get a little difficult?
Yeah, it's a very deep question, and reflecting upon my source of power today, I know what my source of power is. I'm very clear that my true source of power is my spirituality and my value system.
Mhm.
Today, I'm very clear. 2 decades back, or when I was a schoolgirl or a college girl and transitioning continents, uh, I could not have answered this question knowing where my power is coming from, what my true source of power is. I think you go through the peaks and the valleys, right? And every time you go through it, when you bounce back and when you come out of it, right? And it happens to you a couple of times, you start reflecting on what is it that sets you apart, right? How is it that something that would have knocked down somebody completely, right? Not to try continuing on that path again while you keep going, which has been my story. And it really comes down to my value system and my spirituality. I would say that there's huge resilience. I've come to know, as I said in my previous conversation, in my in the previous questions, was right, when you're young, your courage is uncalculated, right? You develop situational awareness slowly and gradually, and then you understand, right, how to be courageous in what manner and where. But I believe that one key aspect of my source of power when I talk about value system is my concept of righteousness, right? Of not bringing harm to anybody. And I think what that gives me is that my decision making, and it's both in my personal life and in my professional life, right? You can get a lot of distractions from your environment in many ways, especially when you're going through hard times and when you're going through challenging times and when you are really feeling low, right? To
Mhm.
give up or to take a course or take a path that is unethical or to go down, if someone's harming you and someone's trying to harm you, to harm them back and seek revenge. I mean, just some examples, right? But to be powerful is really understanding how do you manage those situations. And that's where my spirituality, I have meditative practices. I've had those from childhood because of the spiritual environment I was raised in, but they've just strengthened over the course of my life. And they strengthened more and more at the time of adversity, right?
Mhm.
Because those became my anchor. And another thing that I would especially emphasize on is I've learned along the way, when you talk about the source of power, is reflection before really you decide your next action, right? Anytime, whether you have the power or you're trying to claim the power, you're going after power. I think that reflection to understand the implications and the impact of your choices, right, in your personal life and in your professional life, that's going to define whether the power that you utilized through inner source or the external source was utilized in the right way. See, that's the whole thing with power. You can utilize in the right way or you can utilize power in a wrong way. So, if that answers your question, right? It was a very deep question, so it's
I
not
know it
very
was a
easy
very
to
deep
answer.
question, and I
Yeah.
really wish that you were an advisor for our government, but that's a conversation for another day. And so when we talking about the title, and you've touched on it a little bit, but the journey from influence of power to the power of influence, what do you mean by that? And also, how can we, regardless of, the stage of our career, our thought leadership, our corporate leadership, where can we draw on that for our sense of power?
Yeah, very, very good question, Cheryl. I think, when you talk about my journey, everybody has a different journey, but um, my growing up, right? Your first question was what inspired me to make big, right? And I said it was just there was natural aspiration in me. I mean, if you think about the first part of your question, journey from the influence of power, right? The influences surrounding me as I was growing up was really all about power as a schoolgirl, because my father was in bureaucratic services in India, in government services at a very senior position, right? And it was really, really very, I would say, a privileged childhood in upper middle class, right? And a lot of influences of what it means to be powerful, right? And you go through all of that, and again, you start seeking positions of power. I want to have this title, I want to have a corner office, and even to that matter, somebody trying to aspire to have a doctorate, which is the epitome, right? The highest degree, could be a symbol of power, right? In my journey, having gone through those influences, right? Certainly, I never thought about it as seeking power, but it did end up, taking me into positions of power. Going through my whole journey and overcoming the adversities and the challenges, was a realization, right? That how you utilize the position where you're in, if you are really in a position where you can either benefit people or harm people, right? You can make decisions that can go wrong for people or right for people, right? And also understanding the difference between power is certainly not only what your position and your title brings. Power is what you personally bring in setting an example for how you make a move, for how you overcome situations, how you treat people, right? And how you help others. And I think that particular aspect of power is what ends up becoming influence, right? So I have seen a lot of people who have positional power, right? But they have yet to learn how to use that positional power in a manner that it influences people's life in a positive manner. And in my personal journey, I think, even my position in the industry now as a thought leader comes without any positional power. If I'm going to a conference and I'm on a panel, yes, my title as a CHRO probably helps it. But if tomorrow I'm not a CHRO, that's not in any way going to stop people from coming and saying, really, we want a part of your thought leadership. And that's basically the journey of how do you separate yourself just from your titles, from the hierarchies, from the positions you get, but you give back to the community. You give back. I mean, I'm an educationist, right? I'm in the area of education. I've been for 9 years an adjunct professor. It's really more understanding the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? And there's lifelong learning, and you get knowledge, and you could still be far away from true wisdom, right? And I think that's similar to a journey of going from the power of influence, or influence of power, to the power of influence, where you really move beyond being in a position of authority to make a difference and bring an impact.
Mhm. And I love that you witnessed power, when you were growing up, but also for those people listening that maybe they didn't witness it and they had to create it themselves, or just it seems like it's important to, if you want to rise, and it's great if you had those environmental factors or role models, but if for some reason that you didn't, to see the people that came before you, and potentially people that you don't even know could draw upon your power and say, wow, she did this, so can I. And so draw upon, so don't, if you're watching and you're thinking about someone or a situation where you can draw power, that's wonderful. If you're thinking that I wasn't raised like that, I didn't have a person or situation, then there are so many different places and people to draw from, including your story. Dr. Vyas. So, for everybody listening along those lines, what is a call to action or something that if we would like to up level the power of our influence and the impact that we are having that we can do?
Yeah, well, I would say, if we stay true to our topic, my message would be the power of influence is more powerful than power alone,
Mhm.
right? And I think a lot of powerful people try to influence using the positional power, right? And forget the difference between face value and place value,
Mhm.
right? And I think, that's the journey of going from knowledge to wisdom. So really trying to get to becoming influential without a position authority is a huge win for anybody, right?
Mhm.
Whatever, all journeys are different, like you said, right? Every journey is different. It's how you carve it for yourself. The other thing that I would say is what I've learned, and it's both through my own journey plus looking at other people's journey, is balancing power with humility, because that's where your character actually comes into play, right? What shows character is how do you use your power.
Mhm.
And not all of us, and not many of that I've seen in powerful position have learned how to balance that power, with humility. And certainly that ends up defining who you become as a person. There's this whole thing, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think there is a certain level of character and the reflection and, thinking about the privilege you have in a position of power and how adversely you can impact other people's life. What do you want to do with that privilege that's been granted to you? And the last thing I would say is becoming self-aware is where it starts, right? Because these concepts are heavy concepts. The concept of power is a heavy concept. The concept of influence is very heavy. There are theories around these, right? And all of our journeys are independent of each other, right? I mean, all the audience listening to me are going to derive different things from this conversation. But I think what stays true for each of us is our own self awareness and reflection wherever we are in our journey, to understand, okay, what brings power to me, right? Is it with the position or without the position, with a title, without a title, right? And how do I take that and convert it or evolve that to an influence, right? That carry forwards and lasts for longer than my positional or title driven power.
I love that. And I feel like in that last question, and I especially love to like using it for the greater good. And I feel like if you are hopefully already teaching a class on this at USC, or if not, I think it would be amazing, or potentially in, a book, the book that you didn't know that you were writing yet, because I think it could help so many people. Well, Dr. Vyas, I am really grateful for your time. Congratulations on all of the mountains that you've climbed and the impact and the awards, and I look forward to following your journey.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to have this conversation, Sheryl, and I wish you really, really good luck and all my best wishes for the wonderful work that you're doing.
Thanks so much.